Welcome to another episode of I Swear We're Not Idiots, the podcast where I talk about my hyperfixation for the week, and this week it's Bonnie and Clyde. Before I get into this love story, this video is for entertainment purposes only. These are my own opinions and sick humor. There is talk about murder, weapons, sexual assault, shootouts, injuries, and gang-related activities. I do not mean to offend anyone. Viewer discretion is advised. Before I talk about the infamous crimes, let's talk about their early years. Bonnie Parker, she was born on October 1st, 1910. We know she dropped out of school and she got married to Roy Thornton shortly before her 16th birthday. Their marriage only lasted about 2.5 years. Then they split up. They never divorced, but they never saw each other again. Even though her true love was Clyde, Bonnie still wore the ring Roy gave her till her death. After leaving Roy, she moved back in with her mother. She worked as a waitress in Dallas. She kept a diary for a brief time when she was around 18. She expressed how lonely she was and how much she disliked Dallas and how much she loved photography. That's pretty much all we know about Bonnie Parker's early life. Clyde Barrow. He was born on March 24th, 1909. Clyde came from a poor family. Clyde had 6 siblings. When he was 11, they moved to Dallas. They lived under their wagon for months until they were able to afford a tent. His criminal life started when he was a teenager. His first arrest was at 17 for failure to return a rental car. His second arrest was soon after for possession of, guess what? Stolen turkeys. Not sure if they were alive or dead, but he stole them turkeys. Bonnie met Clyde in 1930. Bonnie was 19 and Clyde was 20. They met through mutual friends. They were smitten with each other. For the next couple of weeks, they never left each other's side. Their romance came to a halt when Clyde was arrested for auto theft. At 21, Clyde was still in prison, but he had a plan to escape. He had Bonnie smuggle in him a weapon, and he used that to actually escape. It didn't last long. He was captured shortly after. He hated prison. I mean, who would love it? But he hated prison. He got sexually assaulted in prison repeatedly and eventually killed his attacker. This was his first murder. Someone else ended up taking the blame for it that was serving life, so he never got in trouble for it. In prison, Clyde was put to work, and he didn't like it. He did not want to do the hard labor. So while in prison, he amputated 2 of his toes, so he did not have to go work. In the meantime, his mother petitioned for his release, and it was actually granted. 6 days after he cut off his toes, he was released from prison. Even though he was free, he had the permanent scar of walking with a limp for the rest of his life because of those missing toes. In 1932, Ralph Fultz joined Bonnie and Clyde. They committed a series of crimes. After a faulted hardware store robbery, Bonnie and Ralph were arrested. Bonnie was released within a couple of months because a grand jury failed to indict her. Ralph was convicted and sent to prison. He never rejoined the gang. The crimes continued. Clyde was a getaway driver for a store robbery, where the owner was shot and killed. He was identified as one of the killers, even though he never got out of the car. A little while later, Clyde was in a parking lot of a country dance with his friends Raymond Hamilton and Ross Dyer. They were drinking moonshine, having fun, getting a little rowdy. Sheriff Maxwell and Deputy Moore approached the men. Clyde and one of his friends opened fire on the officers, killing Deputy Moore and wounding Sheriff Maxwell. That drew attention by the authorities to Clyde and his gang. J.D. Jones was a friend of Clyde's and a friend of his family's. He ended up joining the gang when he was 16 years old. On Christmas, Jones and Clyde murdered Dale Johnson while trying to carjack him. On January 6, Bonnie, Clyde, and Jones stumbled into a police trap. Clyde ended up killing Deputy Malcolm during the escape. In the past year, the members of the gang killed 5 people. In 1933, Buck and Blanche Barrow joined the gang. Buck was Clyde's brother. Buck was released from prison, and his wife Blanche stayed with Bonnie, Clyde, and Jones at their hideout. One night, the gang was playing cards, drinking, having fun, being loud. At one point, Clyde shot a borrowing automatic rifle, which is called a bar. The neighbor reported the noise to the police department. The 5 officers came out to the house thinking there were bootleggers squatting at the house. Clyde, Buck, and Jones opened fire on the officers, killing a detective and wounding another. Bonnie opened fire with a bar. The guys got in the car to make a getaway. Blanche almost ruined it and got them captured because she was trying to get her dog Snowball. Bonnie grabbed her and they jumped in the car. Jones was hit, Clyde was hit, but the bullet hit his coat button, so it wasn't that bad of a wound, and a bullet grazed Buck. The gang escaped but left a lot of stuff behind at that hideout. Buck's parole papers were there, a large arsenal of weapons, a handwritten poem by Bonnie, and a camera with undeveloped pictures. The police developed the photos and sent some along with the poem to the newspaper. This became front page news, and the iconic picture of Bonnie and the cigar became extremely popular. The next 3 months, they traveled the country as fugitives. They tried to rob a bank in Indiana. It didn't go as planned, and they aborted the situation. They robbed a bank in Minnesota. They kidnapped Dillard Darby and Sophia Stone in Louisiana during a carjacking. Jones used that car and left the gang, but he ended up coming back a couple months later. As the news spread of their crimes, the gang found it harder and harder to hide. People everywhere started to recognize them. Clyde was driving Jones and Bonnie near Wilmington, Texas, when they were crossing a bridge that was under construction. I'm not sure if he didn't see the signs or just ignored them. The car ended up flipping into the ravine. Bonnie's leg got severely burned. Not sure if it was fire from the car or the battery acid leaking on her leg. The battery from the car was actually located under the floorboards. But Bonnie sustained third-degree burns. It was on her right leg. It was so bad her muscles contracted, causing her leg to draw up. Jones feared she wasn't going to live. From her hip to her ankle, her skin was gone, and you could see her bone in some places. Clyde was able to get her to a nearby farm for help. They hid out in the barn. Sheriff George Corey and the city marshal showed up when the farmer reported strangers were on his property and one was wounded. Clyde ended up kidnapping the officers and handcuffed and barbed wired them to a tree in Oklahoma. Bonnie and Clyde ended up rendezvousing with Buck and Blanche. They hid in a tourist center in Arkansas while they nursed Bonnie's wounds. While they were there, Buck and Jones went to do a robbery, but they messed up, and they end up killing a town marshal, Henry D. Humphrey. Because of this, the gang had to flee town despite Bonnie's severe condition. In July 1933, the gang checked into the Red Crown Tourist Court. It was like a tavern, hotel type thing. It was in Missouri. Blanche reserved a cabin for 3 guests, but the owner saw 5 people get out of the car. The owner became suspicious and kept an eye on the group. He noted that they backed their car in what they call gangster style, which is like for a fast getaway. They only paid in coins, no bills. She bought 5 meals, not 3. They taped newspaper all over the windows of the cabin. And Blanche's outfit wasn't common attire for the woman in that area. She was wearing I don't know what it's called, but it's like horse riding gear when you're performing tricks and stuff on a horse. That's what she was wearing. Clyde and Jones went into town and purchased bandages, some crackers and cheese, and I don't know how to pronounce this word, but it's like something sulfate. It was to help Bonnie's leg. The pharmacist ended up contacting the sheriff because this was a suspicious purchase. So the sheriff put the cabin under surveillance. There was actually a BOL released in Oklahoma, Texas, and Arkansas for a suspicious group of people buying similar items. When the sheriff heard of the BOL, he took action. He called reinforcements and an armored car. It was 11 a.m., and the officers were armed with submachine guns. The gunfight began. The gang managed to escape when a bullet hit the armored car and made the horn go off. The officers mistook that as a ceasefire and didn't pursue the gang after that. The gang once again escaped, but with injuries. Buck had a large wound in his head from a bullet blast, which left his brain exposed, and Blanche was nearly blinded by debris. The gang hid out at an abandoned amusement park called Dixfield Park. Buck wasn't doing so well. He was semi-conscious, talking and eating very little, but Clyde and Jones knew he was going to last that much longer, and they dug a grave for him. Residents in the area noticed that there were bloody bandages and notified the authorities. The detectives knew the gang was hiding out there. Local police surrounded the park, and 100 spectators watched and waited. Gunfire broke out once again. Miraculously, Bonnie, Clyde, and Jones escaped on foot. Buck, unfortunately, got shot in the back of the head. He was still alive, though. Him and Blanche were arrested. Buck ended up dying 5 days later in a hospital from the head wounds and pneumonia. The gang was on the run for the next 6 weeks. They stayed away from the usual spots, but still committed robberies. They restocked their arsenal after robbing an armory. In September, the gang decided to risk it all and do a Dallas run to see their families. Jones ended up heading to Houston to see his mother. He was arrested in November. They took him back to Dallas to prosecute for his crimes. The police caught wind that Bonnie and Clyde were back in Texas. On November 22nd, they set a trap to catch them. The police hid around one of Clyde's family members' houses. When Clyde was pulling up, he sensed something was wrong, and instead of stopping, he drove past the house. Deputies jumped out and opened fire at Bonnie and Clyde. Both of them were struck in the leg by bullets, but they escaped. On November 28th, a warrant came out for Bonnie and Clyde's arrest for murder. January 1934. Clyde orchestrated the escape of Hamilton and Henry Methvin and others at the Eastham breakout. Some of the men that escaped ended up joining the gang. After this, the federal government got involved and the manhunt began. Captain Frank Hammer took the lead to bring this gang down. April 1st, it was an Easter Sunday. Highway patrolmen H.D. Murphy and Edward Bryant stopped their motorcycles thinking there was someone in need on the side of the road. Bonnie, Clyde, or Henry opened fire on both officers. The officers were killed, and reports were saying Bonnie delivered the fatal shot to each one. That became front page news once again. A $1,000 reward was offered to the capture or the bodies of the cop killers, and an extra $500 for Bonnie since she delivered the kill shot. In May 1934, Henry ended up getting separated from Bonnie and Clyde, and if that were to ever happen, they were supposed to meet up back at his mother's house. Hammer, in the meantime, was determined to catch these criminals. He studied their every move, every habit, everything that they did. Hammer predicted the gang's next move. They end up capturing Henry and convinced him to work with them for a lesser charge. Hammer set up an ambush. They positioned themselves along a Louisiana highway with Henry's car parked off to the side, hoping Clyde would stop to check on Henry. Hammer lay and waited for over 24 hours. Finally, they saw a car speeding in the distance. As planned, Clyde slowed down, seeing Henry's car on the side of the road. The lawman opened fire on Bonnie and Clyde. While the car was still moving, Clyde was shot in the head and died instantly. 130 rounds were shot in the car. Clyde was hit 17 times. Bonnie was hit 26 times. Multiple shots were headshots. They had so many bullet wounds, the undertaker had a hard time embalming the bodies. Once the news broke of the deaths, people flocked to the scene to steal souvenirs. A lady cut off a piece of Bonnie's hair and a part of her dress. Someone even tried to cut off Clyde's fingers. The police ended up towing the car with the bodies still in it. Bonnie and Clyde wished to be buried next to each other, but Bonnie's family would not allow it. Bonnie is buried at Crown Hill Cemetery, and Clyde is buried next to his brother Marvin in Western Heights Cemetery. 20 family and friends of Bonnie and Clyde got arrested and tried for aiding and abetting the couple. Blanche ended up blind in her left eye. She was sentenced to 10 years but was released early. She ended up getting married and living in Dallas until she died of cancer in 1969. Roy, remember Roy? The man that Bonnie first married? He was in prison when he heard about her death. He was serving 5 years for robbery. He attempted many escapes but ended up dying during one of them. And that's the infamous love story of Bonnie and Clyde. Like they say, love never dies unless the authorities dump 150 rounds in you and your lover. Then you're cooked.